The galaxy banned human history completely, but one human ignored the rule. Let's start the story.
The galaxy believed humans were primitive. Then one human walked into the Academy's final exam and opened humanity's file. My name is Kreth Solvan. I am a professor of civilizational theory at the Galactic Academy of Unified Sciences, located on the upper meridian shelf of planet Valoris, where the sky is a permanent shade of violet and the air smells faintly of crystallized ozone. I have taught at this institution for 41 years. I have seen students from 26 different species walk through those front gates. I have graded thesis papers that made me weep with intellectual joy, and I have graded thesis papers that made me question the entire concept of higher education. Nothing, and I want to be very clear about this, nothing prepared me for Caden Reese. He arrived on a standard transport shuttle, third Tuesday of the enrollment cycle, carrying a bag that looked like it had survived some kind of regional conflict, wearing clothing that was clean but wrinkled in a way that suggested he was aware ironing existed but had chosen, as a matter of personal philosophy, to ignore it. He was young by human standards, somewhere in his early 20s, which in human biology apparently means fully grown but still capable of surviving on minimal sleep and poor dietary choices. He walked through the front gates of the most prestigious academic institution in the known galaxy, and he looked around slowly, and then he smiled. Not nervously, not in awe, just a smile, like he had arrived somewhere he had been looking forward to for a while. I was standing near the faculty welcome pavilion when he checked in. I was not assigned to greet him, I was simply present. And I watched my colleague, Professor Wen Duroc of the Felvari species, process Caden's enrollment documents with the particular expression our faculty had quietly agreed upon before the human's arrival. It was the expression of someone being extremely professional about something they found extremely amusing. You have to understand the context. Humans had achieved interstellar travel approximately 31 years prior to this moment. 31 years. Most species in the Galactic Academic Coalition had been spacefaring for centuries. The Thalorians, my own people, had been members of the Coalition for over 800 years, the Fovians for 600. Even the Drellic, who were widely considered late arrivals, had a 300-year head start on humanity. So when a human applied to the Academy, the faculty response was, professionally speaking, one of generous tolerance and personally speaking, something closer to the feeling you get when a very small creature wanders confidently into a room full of much larger creatures and does not appear to notice the size difference. Dean Sorvo Mon delivered the welcome address that afternoon. Sorvo was an older Thalorian, silver-ridged, with the kind of careful voice that always sounded like it was being recorded for posterity. He stood at the central podium in the Grand Assembly Hall, looked out at the new enrollment class, found Caden Reese in the third row, and said with enormous warmth, "The Academy has always welcomed minds from every corner of the galaxy. Every species brings its own perspective, however early that perspective may be in its development." However early, he said it warmly. He meant it as a compliment, technically. The applause was polite. Caden Reese clapped along with everyone else, and did not appear to notice that he had just been called a child in front of 400 students. The following week, the Faculty Curriculum Board met to finalize the elective course listings. Earth history had been submitted as an option. It was listed briefly on the preliminary schedule, then there was a vote. The vote was not close. The reasoning formally recorded was that the subject matter was, quote, insufficiently developed for inclusion in a coalition standard academic program. The course was removed. The decision was considered final. Nobody told Caden Rice. Not because they forgot, but because nobody thought it was relevant enough to mention to him. That was the first mistake. Let me explain the official reasoning, because it deserves to be explained properly, and also because when I read it back now, I feel a specific kind of embarrassment that I do not have a word for in Thalorian. We may need to borrow one from another language, possibly a human one, since they seem to have several that apply. The decision to ban Earth history from the curriculum was not made impulsively. It was made after a pilot program. The Academy, to its credit, had actually attempted to run an introductory Earth history module during the previous enrollment cycle, before Caden arrived. It was a 6-week course, optional attendance, taught by Professor Ilan Voss, a perfectly competent Felvari academic who had done his research and prepared his materials with genuine scholarly care. Week 1 covered early human civilization, basic agricultural societies, city-state formations, early written language. The students were mildly interested. Everything was fine. Week 2 introduced the concept of organized warfare. Not the details, just the concept. 3 students left early. One Fovian submitted a written complaint about the reading materials, describing them as, quote, unnecessarily graphic in their implication. Week 3 was the Mongol Empire. A Fovian student named HFY Rao, who was by all accounts a bright and emotionally stable individual with excellent academic standing, listened to 40 minutes of lecture, and then quietly and without any drama whatsoever, slid out of her chair and onto the floor. She did not fall dramatically. She simply ceased to be upright. The medical team arrived within 4 minutes. HFY was physically fine. She told the medical staff she had become overwhelmed by what she described as the sheer relentless continuation of it. Professor Voss had to pause the course for a week. They resumed with a gentler topic. It did not help. The French Revolution introduced in week 5 produced a different result with a Drelic student named Corval Peth, who was also bright, also stable, and who sat through the lecture with increasing agitation before raising his hand and asking very seriously, "How many times did this happen?" Professor Voss clarified that he was asking about the French Revolution specifically. Corval said, "No, I mean, all of it. How many times did humans do all of it?" Professor Voss began to answer and then stopped, because the honest answer, when said out loud in an academic setting, sounded like something that should not be possible for a species that had since developed space travel. Corval left the room. He was later found in the East Courtyard sitting very still, staring at the violet sky, telling a concerned peer that he needed a few minutes to recalibrate his understanding of linear history. The course did not reach week 6. The faculty curriculum board reviewed Professor Voss's incident reports, read the student feedback forms, noted the medical team's logs, and made their decision. Earth history was, formally and unanimously, classified as emotionally destabilizing content, unsuitable for a general academic environment, without significant preparatory prerequisites that the Academy was not currently equipped to provide. They were very pleased with this wording. It was thorough, it was professional, it implied concern for student well-being without technically saying anything negative about humanity directly. They congratulated themselves quietly over refreshments after the meeting. Now, here is where I must tell you about the smile. When word reached the general student body that the Earth history elective had been permanently removed from the curriculum, the reactions were varied. Most students were indifferent. A few were curious. HFY Rao, recovered and back in classes, was privately relieved. Corval Peth said nothing publicly but was seen nodding slowly when he heard the news, in the way of someone who has made peace with a decision they did not ask for. Caden Reese was sitting in the Eastern Library common area when another student, a Felvari named Doran Selk, told him about the ban. I was not there personally, but Doran told me about it afterward because Doran was unsettled by the reaction and needed to tell someone. Caden looked up from whatever he was reading. He listened to Doran explain the situation, and then he smiled. Not a polite smile, not a forced smile, a slow, quiet, completely genuine smile, the kind that starts at one corner of the mouth and arrives at the eyes a second later. He said, "Okay. Just that. Okay." Then he went back to reading. Doran said it felt like watching someone receive information they had already accounted for, like telling someone it might rain and watching them glance at the umbrella they had already packed. Doran could not explain why it bothered him so much. He just said it felt like Caden Reese had known something, well before any of us did, and had simply been waiting for the rest of us to catch up. The faculty heard nothing about this exchange. They were still congratulating themselves. That was the second mistake. After the smile incident, as I had begun privately calling it, several faculty members agreed, without formally agreeing, to keep a loose eye on Caden Reese. Not surveillance, nothing official. Just the kind of casual professional observation that occurs when a situation makes experienced academics slightly nervous and they do not want to admit it in writing. What we observed was deeply confusing. Caden Reese was, by every measurable standard, an extremely normal young person who was very good at being alive. He made friends within the first week. Not acquaintances. Friends, real ones. He had somehow befriended Doran Selk, who was famously difficult to talk to and had once described small talk as a voluntary cognitive tax. He had befriended a Fovian student named Lev Taran, who was shy to the point of near invisibility, and who was by the third week of term seen laughing openly in the corridor next to Caden at something that, when reported to me secondhand, I still do not fully understand. He had befriended Corval Peth, the same Drelic student who had needed to recalibrate his understanding of linear history after 5 weeks of Earth content. They were by all appearances genuinely close. Corval once told a peer that Caden was alarmingly easy to talk to, and meant it as high praise. He joined the Academy Debate Society. He joined the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Collective. He joined a recreational mathematics group, a long-distance communication club, and something called the Valorous Early Morning Observers, which met before dawn on the observation deck to watch the planet's twin moons set, and which had previously had an attendance of 2. After Caden joined, attendance was 11. He ate food that the Academy cafeteria staff had never been asked to produce before. He made specific, cheerful requests that resulted in the kitchen attempting several human dishes with available local ingredients, with mixed but enthusiastic results. He ate all of them, including the failures, and told the kitchen staff each time that it was great. Actually, the head of cafeteria operations, a Thalorian named Rovan Is, who had worked at the academy for 20 years and had never once been thanked personally by a student, mentioned to me one afternoon that the human was, quote, a genuinely good person to cook for. He slept approximately 5 hours a night. By choice. The medical records we had on file from his enrollment physical confirmed he was capable of sleeping more. He simply did not, because he preferred apparently to use the remaining hours doing other things. Reading mostly. Sometimes just sitting on the eastern courtyard steps in the dark, looking at the violet Valorous sky, which he had told Lev Tehran was his favorite thing about the planet so far. He was polite to the administrative staff, the library catalogers, the groundskeepers, and the maintenance workers. He learned the name of every janitor on his residential floor within the first week. He used those names every time. One of the janitors, a quiet Felvari named Toom, told a colleague that the human had asked him once, with complete sincerity, what the hardest part of his job was, and then had listened to the whole answer. The faculty watched all of this and became progressively more unsettled, because here is what we had expected. We had expected after the curriculum ban some form of reaction, a formal complaint, a petition, an argument with a professor, some expression of the displeasure that any reasonable being would feel upon being told that the history of their own species had been classified as too upsetting for general audiences. We got none of that. What we got was a human who appeared to be having genuinely a wonderful time. Professor Wen Durak raised it at a faculty lounge gathering one evening. He said, "Has anyone else noticed that the human does not seem bothered?" Several people nodded. Someone said perhaps he does not fully understand the implications of the ban. Someone else said he understood enough to smile. Nobody had a good response to that. There is a specific kind of unease that comes from expecting a storm and getting clear skies instead. The clear skies do not reassure you. They make you look harder at the horizon. That is what Caden Reese did to this faculty for 3 solid months. He was cheerful, and he was kind, and he was thriving, and every single day that passed without incident made the incident we were not yet aware of feel more inevitable. We just did not know what it was yet. He did. I need to take a moment here to explain the final comprehensive examination, because without understanding what it is you cannot fully appreciate what Caden Reese did to it. The final comprehensive examination of the Galactic Academy of Unified Sciences is not simply a test. Calling it a test is like calling the Valorous twin moons rocks in orbit. Technically accurate. Catastrophically underselling the reality. The final comprehensive exam is the single most prestigious academic event in the known galaxy. It has been running in its current format for 312 years. Heads of coalition governments have attended as audience members. The proceedings are broadcast on 17 academic channels across 6 star systems. Faculty from allied institutions submit formal requests to observe. Students who perform exceptionally go on to define the shape of their fields for generations. The structure is as follows. Each student selects a research thesis topic. That topic must appear on the Academy-approved subject registry, a document that is reviewed, updated, and ratified by the full faculty curriculum board every 2 years. The student submits their topic for approval no less than 60 days before the examination date. Upon approval, the student has 60 days to prepare a full written thesis and a live defense presentation, which they deliver in front of the complete faculty panel. The faculty may question, challenge, and formally object at any point during the defense. The student must respond to all objections in real time, with citations, with logic, and with composure. It is rigorous. It is demanding. It is, for most species, the most intellectually intense experience of their academic lives. Earth history was not on the approved subject registry. This had been confirmed in writing by the curriculum board after the ban. There was no version of Earth history on that list. There was no adjacent category, no related elective, no sub-discipline that touched on it. The board had been thorough. They had been proud of their thoroughness. Dean Sorvel Maan had reviewed the final registry personally and confirmed to the faculty that the subject had been cleanly and completely removed. What the curriculum board had not done, and I say this with the full knowledge that I was a member of that board and am therefore also responsible, was consider what a human with 60 days of preparation time, full access to the Academy's academic database, and an extraordinarily specific kind of patience might find if he read the approved subject registry very, very carefully. Caden Reese submitted his thesis topic on the first available day of the submission window. The topic as submitted was Patterns of Systemic Resilience Across Collapse Events in Pre-Interstellar Civilizations, a comparative framework for understanding species-level persistence under conditions of catastrophic instability. The Thesis Review Committee, which was a subgroup of 3 faculty members responsible for confirming that submitted topics matched approved registry categories, received the submission, cross-referenced the title against the registry, found matches under no fewer than 4 approved categories, which were civilizational theory, pre-coalition species development, comparative collapse dynamics and interstellar readiness indicators, and stamped it approved within 48 hours. The approval notification was sent to Caden Reese on a Tuesday morning. I was told he was in the cafeteria when he received it on his communication device. According to Doran Selk, who was sitting across from him at the time, Caden looked at the notification, set the device down, picked up whatever he was eating, and continued eating. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, to nobody in particular, "Okay, 60 days. Doran said he seemed calm. Doran said it in the way that people say things when they mean the opposite. I did not hear about the approved topic until 3 days later when the list of approved thesis titles was circulated to full faculty for standard review. I read it in my office on a Wednesday afternoon. I read it twice. Then I read the 4 approved registry categories it had been matched against. Then I sat back in my chair and I looked at the ceiling of my office for what I am told by my office schedule log was approximately 11 minutes. Then I went to find Professor Wen Durak. I showed him the title. He read it. He looked at me. I looked at him. I said, he is going to present Earth history. Wen said, the title is about pre-interstellar civilizations generally. It could cover multiple species. I said, it is going to be Earth history. Wen said, you cannot know that from a title. I said, name one other pre-interstellar civilization that has enough collapse events to build a comparative framework around. Wen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, perhaps we should raise it with the dean. We raised it with the dean. Dean Sorvel Mon listened to my concern with the expression of someone humoring a colleague who had become slightly overwrought. He said the title had been reviewed and approved through proper channels. He said that withdrawing an approval without cause would be academically irregular and would reflect poorly on the institution. He said that if the student presented material outside the scope of his approved topic, the faculty panel could object in real time during the defense. He said, and I am recording this here because I want it noted, Kreth, I think you may be overestimating him. I went back to my office. I sat down. I opened the approved subject registry and read it from the beginning, looking for anything, any clause, any rule, any mechanism that could be used to revisit the approval. I found nothing. Because the approval was clean, because the title was perfectly constructed, because every word in that title existed in approved academic language, pointed at approved academic categories, and did not contain a single phrase that the committee could have flagged without also flagging a significant portion of the rest of the registry. He had not found a loophole in the rules, he had found the exact shape of the rules, and he had built his title to fit that shape so precisely that it had passed through every filter without touching the sides. I taught civilizational theory for 41 years. I had spent a career studying how complex systems either hold together or fall apart under pressure. And sitting in my office that Wednesday evening, reading that thesis title for the 4th time, I felt for the first time in recent memory like a student. 60 days later, Caden Reese walked into that examination hall. I was already there in my faculty seat with my notes, with my objections pre-prepared, with every rule of the examination process memorized and ready. It did not help. The examination hall seats 430 people. Every seat was filled. This was not unusual for the final comprehensive examinations. The event drew crowds. What was slightly unusual was the composition of the crowd. Typically, the audience was a mix of senior students, faculty observers, and a modest number of coalition academic guests. This particular morning, the audience included all of those people, plus what appeared to be the entire enrollment body of the academy, several staff members who were technically on shift elsewhere, and Toom the janitor, who had apparently rearranged his morning schedule, and was sitting in the back row with his cleaning equipment parked neatly beside him, which I found oddly moving and also slightly alarming. Word had gotten around. Students talk. The thesis title had circulated. Most of the student body had not figured out what it meant yet, but they had picked up on the fact that something was happening, in the way that crowds always sense weather before the instruments confirm it. The faculty panel was seated at the long curved desk at the front of the hall. 14 of us, every department head, every senior professor, Dean Sorvel-Mann at the center. I was fourth from the left. I had my notes, I had my objections, I had not slept particularly well. Caden Rice entered the hall at 8 minutes past the start time, which was within the allowable window but only just. He was wearing his academy formal uniform, which was the standard requirement, but he had clearly ironed it that morning in a hurry because there was a crease running in entirely the wrong direction across the left shoulder. He was carrying in his right hand a small wrapped piece of food that he had apparently picked up from the cafeteria on his way in. He was grinning, not nervously, the same grin he had arrived with on his first day, the one that suggested he was looking forward to something. He set his materials on the presentation podium. He tucked the food into his jacket pocket. He looked out at the 430 people in the audience, then at the 14 faculty members watching him from the panel desk, and he said, "Good morning. Thank you for being here." Dean Sorvel-Mann said, formally, "The panel is ready. You may begin." Caden nodded. He pulled up his first display slide. The title read exactly as submitted. Long, clean, academic. Several faculty members visibly relaxed at seeing the familiar approved wording on the screen. I did not relax. I watched Caden's face instead. He began. "The question at the center of this thesis," he said, in a clear and unhurried voice, "is a simple one. When a civilization collapses, what determines whether it stays collapsed? I will argue that the answer lies not in the scale of the resources available, not in the geographic advantages present, and not in the intelligence of the population. I will argue that the answer lies entirely in what the civilization had already survived before the collapse in question." He clicked to his second slide. "For the purposes of this thesis, I will focus on a single pre-interstellar civilization as my primary case study, a species located in the outer spiral, single inhabited planet, carbon-based biology, remarkably short individual lifespan by coalition standards. I will refer to this civilization by the designation they used themselves." He paused for exactly 1 second. "Human," he said. "The civilization is human. The planet is Earth. And before anyone on the panel raises a procedural objection, I would like to direct your attention to Appendix 1 of my submitted thesis document, where I have cross-referenced every section of this presentation against the 4 approved registry categories under which this topic was cleared. Every reference, every claim, every data point. It is all there. I followed every rule. I would like that noted for the record before we continue." The hall was very quiet. I looked at Dean Sorvel-Mann. Sorvel's expression had done something complicated and had not yet finished doing it. Professor Wen Durak leaned toward me and said, very quietly, "You were right." I did not feel good about being right. Caden continued. Within 6 minutes, as I had feared, there was no academic ambiguity left in the room. He was presenting Earth history. All of it. Structured, sourced, cross-referenced, and dressed in the cleanest academic language I had ever seen applied to content this raw. He walked through early human civilization and their relationship with catastrophic crop failure. He walked through the first major plague events. He walked through the wars, not as a list of atrocities, but as data points in a pattern, framing each conflict as a stress test on whatever social structure the civilization had built most recently, and then examining what survived the test and why. He was not dramatic about it. That was the thing that made it land so hard. He was calm and precise, and he cited everything, and the data spoke for itself in a volume that his voice never needed to match. Professor Duolun Veth, head of the Comparative Species Development Department, raised the first formal objection at the 9-minute mark. She said, with crisp authority, "The panel notes that the presenter appears to be drawing exclusively from the history of a single species. The approved topic specifies a comparative framework. Where is the comparison?" Caden said, "Thank you, Professor Veth. I appreciate that. If you look at slide 11 in the distributed materials, you will find a comparison table cross-referencing human collapse events against the documented collapse records of the Thalorian early period, the Fovian Third Era contraction, and the Drellic continental reorganization. The comparison is there. I simply have not reached it yet in the presentation sequence. Would you like me to jump ahead, or shall I continue in order?" Veth looked at slide 11. She was quiet for a moment. "Continue in order," she said. He continued. "Professor Eileen Voss, who had taught the original Earth history pilot course and had perhaps the most personal stake in this moment, raised the second objection at the 14-minute mark. He said the framing was editorializing, that presenting human history as a pattern of resilience was an interpretive stance, not an objective academic position. Caden said, "That is a fair critique, Professor Voss, and I want to engage with it seriously. The counter-argument would require demonstrating that the pattern I am identifying is not statistically present in the data. I have included a regression analysis in Appendix 3 that tests exactly that counter-argument. The pattern holds across every major time period examined. With a confidence margin I am happy to walk through if the panel wishes. The thesis is not arguing that humans are exceptional because they survived. It is arguing that the structure of what they survived tells us something specific and measurable about what survival actually requires. That is an empirical claim, not an editorial one." Voss did not have an immediate response. He wrote something on his notes. He did not raise another objection for the rest of the session. The third, fourth, and fifth objections came in quick succession from 3 different panel members over the following 12 minutes. Each one was met the same way. Caden listened to the full objection without interrupting. He thanked the faculty member. He directed the room to the specific appendix or slide that addressed the concern. He explained his reasoning clearly, without defensiveness, without impatience, and without a single moment of anything that could be formally classified as disrespect. He was not winning arguments by being clever. He was winning them by having done the work. Every objection that came at him hit a wall of preparation so thorough that the objection simply had nowhere to go. At the 30-minute mark, Dean Sorvel-Mann raised his hand for a formal panel pause. The presentation stopped. The dean conferred with the 2 faculty members nearest to him in hushed tones for approximately 90 seconds. Then he lowered his hand. "Continue," he said. Caden nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket, took one brief bite of the food he had carried in, returned it to his pocket, and continued. The hall made a sound, not a laugh exactly, something between a laugh and an exhale. Even 2 of the faculty members made that sound. I was not one of them. I was too busy reading Appendix 3. It was thorough. It was very, very thorough. Somewhere around the 45th minute I stopped watching Caden Reese and started watching the room. This was partly a tactical decision. I had been tracking his presentation closely, cross-referencing his claims against his appendices, looking for the procedural foothold that would allow the panel to intervene in a meaningful way. I had not found one. The preparation was airtight. Every time I identified what I thought might be a gap, I found it pre-addressed in a footnote, or a supplementary table, or a citation stack so deep it would take me 3 working days to fully audit. So I stopped looking for the gap and I looked at the audience instead. Tesvi Rao was in the 7th row. I recognized her immediately. She was the Fovian student who had, during the pilot course 2 years prior, quietly ceased to be upright during the lecture on the Mongol Empire. She had recovered fully, returned to her studies, performed excellently, and had by all accounts moved on. She had not, as far as anyone knew, sought out any further Earth-related content. She was here today, I assumed, for the same reason most students were here. Curiosity, atmosphere, the sense that something worth watching was happening. She was leaning forward in her seat with both hands pressed flat on her knees and her eyes tracking Caden with an expression I can only describe as hungry, not distressed, not overwhelmed. Hungry. Like someone who had been given a small piece of something a long time ago, had found it unexpectedly meaningful, and had spent the intervening time wondering when they might encounter the rest of it. Korval Peth was 12 seats to her left. He had a notepad. He was writing so quickly that I could see, from my position at the faculty panel, the movement of his hand even at that distance. He was not writing casually. He was writing the way people write when they are afraid of losing something, when the information is arriving faster than the hand can keep up and every word feels like something that needs to be caught before it disappears. The rest of the audience was the same, 430 people, and the hall had developed the specific quality of silence that large rooms only produce when every person in them has, simultaneously and without coordinating it, decided to stop making noise. Not the silence of discomfort, not the silence of boredom, the silence of attention so complete that sound itself seems to understand it is not needed. Caden had reached the section on reconstruction. He was walking through the human pattern of rebuilding after catastrophic loss, not the losses themselves. He had covered those earlier, with the same calm precision he had applied to everything else. Now he was on the other side of the losses. The part where the civilization, by any reasonable external assessment, should have stayed down, should have fragmented permanently, should have looked at the scale of what had been destroyed and concluded that reconstruction was not a rational use of remaining resources. Instead, he said, they built, every time. Not cleanly, not efficiently, not without conflict about how or what or in which direction. But they built, and the next version of what they built was informed, structurally, by every previous version that had collapsed. The failures were not interruptions to the civilization. They were, functionally, the education of it. The hall was not breathing loudly. I felt something move in my chest. I want to be precise about this, because I am an academic and precision is what I have, and imprecision in this particular admission feels dishonest. It was not sentiment, exactly. It was not sympathy in the simple sense. It was something closer to the feeling of recognizing a pattern you had seen before but never named, the feeling of understanding arriving slightly ahead of the words for it. I did not like it. I want that noted. I am a Thalorian professor with 41 years of academic experience and a published record of 112 peer-reviewed papers, and I sat in my faculty chair during that examination and felt something shift in my understanding of a species I had spent most of the previous year privately condescending to, and the experience was deeply personally inconvenient. I looked at Tesviral, still leaning forward. I looked at Corval Peth, still writing. I looked at Toom the janitor in the back row, who had his arms folded and his chin slightly raised in the particular posture of someone who is listening so hard that their body has decided to help. Caden was still talking. His voice had not changed pitch. He was not performing. He was simply presenting a thesis, calmly, with citations, about a species that had been knocked down so many times and in so many ways that the knocking down had eventually become, structurally, the source of the getting back up. And the room, all 430 seats of it, was completely, totally, and utterly with him. I looked back at my notes. I looked at my pre-prepared objections. I did not raise any of them. At the 58th minute, Dean Sorvelman called a formal panel recess. This was within his authority. The examination rules permitted the faculty panel to call a single recess of no more than 15 minutes during any defense session, for the purpose of, and I am reading directly from the procedural guidelines here, panel consultation and deliberation on matters of academic process. It had been used perhaps 4 times in the history of the examination, in cases of genuine procedural ambiguity. Sorvel used it here. He announced the recess in his careful, recorded for posterity voice, and the 14 faculty panel members filed out through the side door into the consultation chamber adjacent to the hall. The consultation chamber is a narrow room with a long table, no windows, and lighting that has always been slightly too harsh for comfort. We stood around that table and Sorvelman looked at us and said, "I want options." Everyone spoke at once. Then nobody spoke. Then Professor Dulan Veth said, carefully, "On what grounds?" Sorvel said, "He is presenting Earth history." Veth said, "He is presenting a thesis on pre-interstellar civilizational resilience, cross-referenced against 4 approved registry categories, with full citation documentation and a comparative framework that includes Thalorian, Fovian, and Drellic historical data." Sorvel said, "Which is Earth history?" Veth said, "Which is also the other thing." The room was quiet. 3 faculty members made individual attempts over the following 6 minutes to identify a procedural violation. Professor Rayalondis argued the scope was too narrow for a comparative framework thesis. He was directed to slide 11 and the comparison table, which he had apparently not looked at closely enough the first time. He looked at it now. He stopped arguing. Professor Gwen Talov argued the emotional impact on student observers constituted grounds for interruption under the student well-being provisions of the examination code. She was reminded by Professor Voss of all people that the student well-being provisions applied to distress, and that the audience outside did not appear to be in distress. The word she used to describe them was riveted, and she said it in the tone of someone who finds the word personally offensive. Then a junior professor named Sale Dav, who was in her 2nd year on faculty, who had said nothing up to this point, and who I suspect had a longer career ahead of her than the rest of us combined, raised her hand slightly and said, in a very quiet voice, "If we disqualify him right now, without a rule violation on record, in front of 400 students and 17 broadcast observers, we will look exactly like what we have been." Nobody asked her to clarify what she meant by that. The motion to disqualify failed. It was not a close vote. Sorvelman straightened his collar, composed his expression into something professionally neutral, and led us back through the side door into the examination hall. Caden Rice was standing at the podium with his jacket open, eating the food he had brought in his pocket. When the faculty panel re-entered, He folded the remaining portion back into its wrapper and looked up. Then, with complete and genuine hospitality, he held the wrapper out toward Professor Wendurak, who was nearest to him on the return path, and said, "Do you want some? There is still a decent amount left." Wendurak looked at the offered food. He looked at Caden. He reached out and took a piece. He ate it. He returned to his seat at the faculty panel. Nobody on the panel said anything. Nobody in the audience said anything. Caden tucked the remaining wrapper away, rolled his shoulders once, and looked at his presentation display. "Where were we?" he said, pleasantly. It was not quite a question. "Reconstruction," said Corval Peth from the audience, helpfully, before anyone else could speak. Several people laughed, including, and I am recording this because accuracy matters, 2 members of the faculty panel. I was not one of them. I was looking at my notes. I had one objection left that I had not yet raised, and I was deciding whether it was strong enough to survive contact with Appendix 3. It was not. I put my notes face down on the desk. "Reconstruction," said Caden Reese, and continued. The closing statement began at the 1 hour and 42-minute mark. Caden moved away from his display slides for the first time in the entire presentation. He stepped slightly to the side of the podium, not dramatically, not with any theatrical intent that I could identify, simply in the way of someone who no longer needs the podium to hold anything up for them. He looked at the faculty panel. Then he looked at the audience. Then he looked, briefly, at nothing in particular, in the way of someone organizing a thought they want to get exactly right. Then he began. "The conclusion of this thesis," he said, "is not that humans are remarkable. I want to be clear about that, because I think that framing would miss the point entirely, and missing the point at the end of a thesis is a particularly frustrating place to miss it." A small sound moved through the audience. Agreement, possibly, or recognition. "The conclusion," he continued, "is about information. Specifically about what happens when a judgment is made without the complete information being consulted. Every metric the Coalition currently uses to rank civilizational development is based on what a species has built: technology, infrastructure, interstellar capability, communication range. These are reasonable metrics. They measure real things. They are not wrong." He paused. "They are incomplete." He clasped his hands in front of him, loosely, in the posture of someone having a calm conversation rather than delivering an address to 430 people and a 17-channel broadcast. "A complete assessment of any civilization's development," he said, "requires reading the full record, not just what was built, but what was lost, not just where a species arrived, but what it crossed to get there. Every plague that was survived and then studied until it could not kill that way again. Every war that was ended and then examined until the conditions that started it were at least partially understood. Every collapse that was rebuilt, not into a copy of what existed before, but into something that remembered what the previous version had failed to protect. The hall was doing the silence thing again, the complete one. "Several species in this coalition," Caden said in the same conversational tone, with no sharpness in it, no accusation, no raised volume, nothing that could be formally classified as anything other than an academic observation, "have described humanity as primitive, as underdeveloped, as early. I understand that assessment. Based on the metrics commonly applied, it is not an irrational one, but I would like to note respectfully and for the record that every species which has made that assessment did so without reading the complete file." He let that sit in the air of the hall for exactly as long as it needed to. "This thesis," he said, "is the file." Corval Peth had stopped writing. His pen was resting against his notepad and he was sitting completely still. Tesvi Ral's hands were no longer flat on her knees. They were folded in front of her mouth, in the posture of someone who is holding an expression carefully in place and is not entirely succeeding. Caden looked at the faculty panel one final time. "I am grateful to this institution for the education it has provided," he said. "I am grateful to the panel for their time and their questions today, which were good questions genuinely, and which I hope the appendices addressed adequately. I am proud of this thesis. I believe it meets the standard of the examination." He reached to the podium and picked up his formal grade submission document, the single page that every student handed to the panel at the close of their defense. He walked it to the faculty desk himself rather than leaving it on the podium for collection, which was technically within the rules. He placed it in front of Dean Sorvel Mon. Sorvel looked down at it, then up at Caden. His expression had completed whatever complicated thing it had started doing during the opening minutes of the defense. It had arrived somewhere that I can only describe as a man who has understood something he would have preferred not to understand, and has decided for reasons of personal integrity not to pretend otherwise. Caden stepped back from the faculty desk. He smiled. The same smile from the first day. The same smile from the library common area when Doran Selk had told him about the ban. The slow one, that arrived at the eyes a second after the mouth, that looked like someone who had known something was coming and had simply been patient about it. He walked back to the presenter's position, gathered his materials from the podium with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had finished what they came to do, and sat down in the designated presenter's chair to the left of the main stage. He sat with his hands resting on his knees and his posture relaxed and his expression open and easy, and he waited for whatever came next with the particular quality of stillness that I had, over the course of that morning, come to recognize as something I did not previously have a category for. It was not arrogance, it was not performance. It was, I realized, sitting at my faculty desk with my face-down notes and my unused objections and my profoundly rearranged morning, simply the stillness of someone who had done the work, knew they had done the work, and was at peace with whatever the work had earned. The hall did not applaud. Not yet. It was still too quiet for applause. It was the kind of quiet that comes just before something shifts permanently. The panel deliberated for 2 hours and 17 minutes. I know this because I sat in the consultation chamber for the entirety of it, which is the longest I have sat in that narrow, harshly lit room in 41 years of faculty service, and I would like to formally note for any institutional record that reads this, that the lighting in that room remains unacceptably harsh and someone should do something about it. The scoring was not contentious. That is the part I was not expecting. I had anticipated argument. I had prepared for a long and painful negotiation between faculty members who wanted to score the thesis on its merits and faculty members who wanted to find procedural grounds to reduce the score for reasons that would not survive being said out loud. What I got instead was 14 faculty members sitting around a table and one by one writing their scores on individual assessment forms with the quiet efficiency of people who had already made peace with what the morning had shown them. The scores were collected. The calculation was made by the examination registrar, a meticulous Felvari named Porvin Tal, who had been running examination numbers for 23 years and who read the final score out to the room with an expression of complete professional neutrality that I deeply respected and slightly envied. Caden Reese received the highest thesis score in the recorded history of the Galactic Academy of Unified Sciences. It was not close. It was not a controversial result. It was, when the numbers were laid out plainly, simply what the work had earned. The score was announced publicly the following morning. The broadcast went to all 17 academic channels. I did not watch it. I had already written it into my personal academic log the night before, along with several other things I needed to record while they were still accurate, and before the institutional memory had time to sand the edges off them. My log entry from that evening, which I am including here because honesty is the only thing I have left to offer this account, reads as follows. Caden Reese, final score, highest on record. Earth history thesis, passed every filter, broke no rules, answered every objection, sat down and smiled. I had 41 years of experience and 14 pre-prepared objections, and I used none of them because none of them were strong enough. I am retiring at the end of this academic cycle. I have already drafted the letter. I want to be clear that this decision is unrelated to today's events. I also want to be clear that I am aware of how that sounds. I submitted my retirement letter 4 days later. 3 other faculty members requested sabbaticals within the same week. Professor Wen Durock, who had eaten the snack, Professor Dulan Veth, who had argued scope and been directed to slide 11, and Professor Gwen Talav, who had used the word riveted in the consultation chamber and had not forgiven herself for it since. None of the sabbatical requests cited the examination. All of them were approved without comment, because Porvin Tala processed the paperwork, and Porvin Tala had been in that room when the score was read out and understood, without being told, that comment was not required. Tesvi Rao, the Fovian student who had been unable to remain upright during a lecture on the Mongol Empire, submitted a formal application to the Academy Specialization Program 3 weeks after the defense. Her chosen specialization was Earth Studies, which was, by that point, a real program again. The curriculum board had reinstated Earth history to the main course listings at an emergency session held 6 days after the examination. The reinstatement was passed unanimously and without significant discussion, in the manner of people correcting something they would prefer not to discuss at length. There was no announcement. There was no fanfare. The course simply appeared on the updated listings, and the faculty moved on, and nobody brought up the previous decision in any official setting again. Corval Peth finished the notes he had been taking during the defense, typed them formally, and submitted them to the Academy's student academic journal as a published summary of the defense proceedings. The journal accepted it. It became the most read student publication in the journal's history within 2 weeks. He did not seem surprised by this. Doran Selk told me in passing, near the end of the academic cycle, that Caden had not changed at all after the defense. Same 5 hours of sleep, same terrible food, same early mornings on the eastern courtyard steps, looking at the violet sky, same way of asking people how they were and then actually waiting for the answer. I thought about that for a long time. Here is what I have concluded. After 41 years of teaching civilizational theory, after one examination morning that rearranged something fundamental in my professional understanding, and after considerably more reflection than I am entirely comfortable admitting to, humans are not what anyone in this coalition expected them to be. They are not primitive in the way we meant it. They are not early in the way Sorvelman said it at that welcome address, warmly, condescendingly, into a microphone in front of 400 students. They are something we do not have a clean category for yet, which is a civilization that was educated, brutally and repeatedly, by everything that tried to stop it, and that arrived here carrying every single one of those lessons in the architecture of how it thinks. The worst part, the part that I will take with me into retirement and that I suspect will follow me there without any difficulty at all, is this: they knew. Caden Rise sat in that library common area on the day Doran Selk told him about the ban, and he smiled, and he said okay, and he already knew. He knew what he had survived to get here. He knew what his species had survived to get here. He knew it the way you know something that has been built into you over a very long time, through a very long series of events that were not gentle and did not ask permission. He just waited for us to read the file. We should have read it sooner.
Stories like this are fun to imagine, but they actually say something interesting about us as humans. Throughout history, people often underestimate others until they finally see what they are capable of. Think about it in real life too. Many discoveries, inventions, and achievements happened because someone refused to accept what everyone else believed. So I'm curious, do you think humanity would actually surprise the galaxy one day? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy sci-fi stories like this, don't forget to like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Tales. Also press the bell icon so you don't miss the next story.